You had me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me at Cello. Playing the cello has so many pluses. It never grows old. Give it one listen. Hi, everybody. 5 o'clock on a Friday. Time for another episode of Cello Chat. Glad to have you with me, and also very glad to have with me this week Suzanne Dicker. How are you doing, Suzanne?
I'm fine, thank you.
Great. It's great to have you here. Let's jump right in with, if you would explain just your musical background. How did you get to where you are? What drew you to cello in the first place?
Sure. I have I guess a checkered background as far as cello is concerned, because I my mother was a pianist. She played really beautifully, so I grew up hearing gorgeous piano music. She didn't play professionally, but I was one of four children, so I heard a lot. She didn't teach us very much, but I did study piano in college as well. So I studied piano and cello, but I'll get to that in a second.
Uh-huh.
But I loved music, and I loved musical instruments. I just loved all the different timbres. I wasn't drawn to any one in particular, except maybe the drums. I loved the drums, and I even, as a child, wired two bushels together and put a saucepan in between, and played along. I just loved it. I did get a cello when I was 11 years old, but I didn't get a teacher until a couple years later. So you can imagine Pablo Casals kind of was in the same situation. He was teaching himself for a few years. Not that I'm comparing myself to him, but when I eventually got a teacher, it was what someone once told me, the old-fashioned method of learning, where you sit side by side. I don't know if you've ever heard about this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we were looking at all I remember is endless dot sour duets. To this day, I do not do dot sour duets with my students. But he never listened to me play. He just said, there's an F sharp, put your third finger on it. So, when you're always staring at notes and you're always just trying to figure out, where do I go? You can't possibly be thinking about your body or listening to tone, and not even getting any feedback from the teacher on how you sound. So this went on till I was a senior in high school. Sorry. And so I was, but by some miracle, when I was a junior in high school, I was accepted into a youth orchestra on the cello. So that kind of solidified that I was kind of going to be playing the cello, although I did play trumpet and baritone horn and drums in jazz band. And
Awesome.
yeah, so because I just loved it. And I also started composing when I was about 15, because at that point I realized I wasn't really great on any instrument. But I've always loved to create, and I just love music. So I had to do something for myself. And so I started composing, and I did have a jazz piece performed in high school, which had to do with pencil and paper and write out all the parts. No Sibelius software. But and then in college, I had some choral pieces performed.
Nice.
So I was into composition, but I was also kind of depressed that I couldn't go to a music conservatory. And I was a junior in high school. I looked at the list of requirements, and it said a 3-octave scale. I couldn't play past fourth position, and I was very depressed that year. And then unfortunately, in college, I had a teacher who I think might have had Parkinson's. It just was, and he kept a bottle of whiskey in the cupboard. So it's like I didn't get any good cello teaching in college. So anyway, I did get married to a British chap, and we moved to London. And for 10 years, we lived there. And I eventually got a very good cello teacher named Lowri Blake. And she just had to, sit me down and don't even play the cello, just learn how to sit. And then she gave me the cello, and then I had to just sit for a few minutes, just with the cello, just to get used to a new way of sitting with the cello. So really, and then started with Suzuki Volume 1, even though she wasn't a Suzuki teacher, but I started to do some Suzuki training in England.
Wow.
So, yeah, eventually I learned the repertoire and was able to play much better. But, even so, over the years, my playing has improved enormously, and especially the last few years, just because of online programs and lots of Cello Bella video chats and things. So, so that's how I got into cello. But cello teaching, it's just my desire to not make anybody go through what I went through. Because, when you really love music and, you have to struggle so much, it's just it's not the best way to go.
All right.
Yeah. So, that's my background, kind of into, and I was in choir singing. I had kind of a broad musical
Yes.
Training.
Yes. Now, Lowri Blake, was she a Christopher Bunting student? Do you happen to know that?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
that sounds a lot like Bunting's approach as well, and he was so wonderful. All right. Well, the main thing I want to talk about is your love for music and your love for teaching, which I think is utterly manifest in your wonderful website. It's such a terrific resource. I want to highly recommend it to everybody. And among the things that I'm so impressed by it, about, for one thing, like the very idea of the American String Teachers Association is that we all benefit in the field as a whole from sharing ideas and trying to figure out the best ways to help inspire and teach the next generation of string players. And that really comes through in your website, and how you really very passionately want to help any youngsters who love the instrument or the field of music as much as you do, to advance, to get to where they want to go. So first of all, just hats off to you, kudos for the valuable resource that it is. But among other things that and I think it's interesting that to me that you're a composer as well, in that I think the creativity that went into the website reflects somebody who wants to create, like often composers, and in these days improvisation as well, improvising, as opposed to feeling like you're just representing somebody else's ideas. Not that that's what we do as a performer, but some youngsters kind of, I think, approach it that way.
Excuse me, but I think that is actually a new trend now, a new good trend in music education, is encouraging and teaching improvisation, which is, as you said, it's so creative and it can lead to composition. The students really interested, and it's so beneficial. And I came through it again this past year from a completely different angle, through learning about partimenti. Do you know about what partimento is? Most musicians don't know. I only learned about it about a year ago, but it's 18th century, a didactic way of teaching, and using bass lines that are unfigured from Galant style period, and you can do it on keyboard, but also on cello. You can play a bass line and sing melodies over it.
Yeah.
And I've been really into that. I've even taken a solfeggio, which is a different type of solfege that the Neapolitan school in Italy. Anyway, it started out with research from this book, Music in the Galant Style.
Nice. Yeah.
And I don't know if you've heard of this.
I don't know that book.
So this was published, I think, 2008. And since then, it's been the latest music theory kind of trend. But it's the reason I found out about it was from Alma Deutscher. Have you heard about her? She's a sort of child prodigy who has written she had an opera performed in California a couple of years ago, and a big Carnegie Hall debut. She's about 16 years old now, but she was trained in this method by one of the first teachers who was doing it, and in Europe. Yeah. Anyway, that's how I found out about it, and it's just the latest improvisation kind of trend. But
Right.
so that and any other kind of improv is just so good.
Yeah, I agree. The over a ground bass is a very user-friendly way. And it is interesting, isn't it, to find out how something has, in many cases, a very long history. Like, wait, this is back to the 1600s, 1700s. Yeah, that's great. Well,
Yeah, we
so
think that, yeah, we think most classical music training, nowadays or for the last century or even 150 years has been, don't learn to improvise, just learn the standard repertoire. That's it. And play it perfectly. And we're finally realizing, no, that's not really how musicians worked and
right.
learned.
Yeah, even if that's not necessarily what the teacher thinks, it can come across that way to the student if it's just this series of now learn this piece, now learn this piece, and that's the impression.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
So this idea that comes across very clearly in your website, first of all, your passion for music, and second of all, that you clearly see yourself as a lifelong learner, and that you're not seeing these ways of teaching, for example, as fixed points in space or anything resembling dogma, but that they need to be allowed to be thought about and talked about and to grow and evolve. Do you have a philosophy of music and continuing education that that you adhere to?
Um, well, I guess my philosophy in everything is that there are exceptions to every rule. And so you can't come up with this is the way you have to teach something. I just learned from a top professional who was a wonderful person and teacher and cellist. He was saying how you have to, when you shift up from a lower position to a higher position, you are you're preparing with basically the upper arm. But when you shift back, it's just the forearm. And I experimented with that this last week, and I think that depends on how large your arm is. It depends on the angle of the cello. It depends on what string you're on. So, he's fabulous, but I think it's not you can't always take even from someone who really is a marvelous musician and cellist that that's really how it works.
Yeah. Well, and another, I'll see what you think about this idea along the same lines or a similar line. Sometimes you run across an idea in the course of cello pedagogy, the history of cello pedagogy, and at first you maybe kind of blink a couple times, but then when you hear what came before it, in some cases, certain things are in reaction to something, whether like how much the wrist or fingers move in a bow change, for example. And if you read something just without hearing what the trend was at the time, it doesn't make as much sense as to go, oh, so they're saying that the current trend goes too far in the other direction, or something like that.
Yeah, maybe that's also due to our general problem with listening to other people's opinions. We tend to have our own, and then it becomes a fight. Whereas, there's always so much more to it.
Yeah. Well, and again, I want to say that your website does a very good job of making that point and providing the raw materials from which students can, so rather than saying here is a way that things must be done a particular way, but here are all these resources for them to explore and find the value in. For example, one of the things, go ahead.
I just want to interrupt you because, having said that, there's always exceptions to every rule. There are also, I taught in a public school for a few years, and we had about 50 cello students new every year. It was a 4th and 5th grade school.
Wow.
It was a huge, huge school. And, I learned then what works for the majority of students of that age. And, so there are definitely, certain things that are going to be very effective for most students. But, it's it's when you're teaching individually, it's you have a lot more leeway, of course, and ability to influence them.
Right. Well, and even when you're teaching in groups, to be on the lookout for people for whom the approach that works tends to work for most people isn't appearing to
Isn't
work,
working.
so that you can
Right.
do something with them. So one of the things that you have on your website is some wonderful cello ensemble music, and I'm curious to get your thoughts about cello ensemble as a whole. I think I know I'm a big fan of it, but what do you think is the pedagogical or inspirational value of cello ensemble?
Well, first of all, there is an ever-growing repertoire of fabulous arrangements, and I have huge amounts of cello repertoire now. I mean, some of which I've done, but many other people's arrangements. And for students, it's especially I have an advanced group right now. They're eighth grade through high school, and they love to get together, especially in the summertime if they're not doing anything else musically. It's just fabulous. And I had one student who told me at the beginning of the summer, can we do busking? She was just like really wanted to do busking. So I said, okay, well, that'll be our goal. So over the last 2 weeks of August, we've got several busking set up, as well as 2 nursing home performances. So I'm really kind of pushing them this year to do a lot in a short amount of time. I mean, hopefully we'll have enough rehearsal. They're sounding pretty good at this point, but we still need more. But so getting back to inspiring your students too. First of all, it's a huge motivation, and now we're doing repertoire. Half of it is classical and half of it is like old show tunes, like My Fair Lady or Sound of Music, especially for nursing homes. People love to sing along or hear music that they really know well.
Mm.
So cello ensemble is great just for a social point of view. And also, I think in general, ever since I started teaching, I've always wanted students to be able to see others playing. And I'll invite my younger students to come and hear these various performances. And I have always thought, well, you drive past a high school and you see a baseball team and kids get inspired. Oh, I want to play baseball. But you don't drive past music stores anymore, or conservatories where there's a big picture window and everybody's happily playing. On the other hand, we do have iPads and things where we can watch fabulous, and that's another way I inspire my students. Hopefully, I give them playlists and things where I've chosen music, that cello music or just even any kind of chamber music that sounds really that's been beautifully recorded as well as beautifully played.
Excellent. Yeah, I think it's a lot of fun. And from a pedagogical standpoint, the fact that you can just at any point that it seems appropriate to trade parts, there's no need to transcribe or anything, just trade the parts and play things in canon.
Yeah, there are a million other reasons too. You can get them to play really in tune. Here's a trick. If your group is sounding out of tune, say play pianissimo now, and instantly they will play in tune because they're finally hearing each other. So definitely try it. It's just so rewarding as a teacher.
Nice. Now I'm curious again on the topic of motivating students to practice. There are certainly, I mean, of course, there are many different types of people. We're all individuals, and that's wonderful. But as teachers, we also look for various tendencies and trends. And there are times that there will be a student who has all the passion, just tons of passion for music or for the instrument. And what you realize that you need to provide is the instruction as to how to make that happen on the physical thing that is a cello. And then there are other times that there are people who, whether it's just because their parents wanted them to play the cello or they took it up as something that they just tried in their school or something like that, where in some cases their technical ability is above their level of passion. I don't know, have you run across people like that? And if so, what do you do to try to get them anywhere near as fired up as the people who already have that internal fire?
Yeah, I'm thinking of two different students. One is very musical, but well, he's now coming up to being a senior in high school. But ever since eighth grade, his practicing went downhill. And most of, I don't know, there are probably a lot of reasons, but he's, in the last few years when he's become a little bit more serious, last year or so, he's just very high achieving in science and math. And so he devotes his energy there. And, he's a high school student, so it's very hard for him to, and he's got a very laid back family. So it's just hard for him to say, oh, I really want to put in an hour of cello practice a day. But because he's so musical and loves it, I've been just going along with whatever I can do. And then another student who's very musical loves it, and she's the one who wanted to do the busking and is highly motivated to do cello ensemble busking. She is very dreamy and loves to do singing at home and other musical things. And but what motivated her was to have a goal. She wanted to audition for regional orchestra. And then her other goal was, she was in a youth orchestra and she got last chair. And she said, well, she told me she was thinking of quitting. And I said, oh my goodness. I said, I'm going to work really hard with you. And, if you want to do this, we're going to work hard. And so we did. And she also wanted to work hard. Once she knew I was joining the program with her to achieve this. And she moved up 6 chairs. So, you have to find something, that will help them. And I've been more into goals lately with my students, which I never used to be. I just talk, I have conversations with them and just to feel out, well, what would you like to achieve by the end of the summer? Or, I think you're ready to audition for this orchestra, stuff like that. Yeah, so,
Right.
and the other aspect maybe of your question would be what's going on at home. And, when the children, I don't usually teach children younger than age 9. And if they're 9 or 10, I try to, help the parents out a bit and give them whatever advice I can. But usually, home life is fixed in every family to a certain extent. The parents, if you have 2 working parents and there's a younger sibling who's, demanding all the attention, there's always some situation which is, making it hard to practice. And so I just keep having the conversations about, and keep trying to come up with maybe another idea that might help. So just, use your teacher creativity. Because you can by having these little conversations, you can hit upon something that, oh, well, I can suggest this, and that might work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. And then let's see, we talked a little bit about a more recent trend towards, we should say a revitalization of a trend towards improvisation, even in the classical style, because clearly they did, hundreds of years ago. Another thing that has been a trend recently has been the various approaches to healthy cello playing. So from the Alexander technique or Feldenkrais or what have you. Do you have in your musical history, do you have favorites or do you have thoughts about the wellness and body mapping type approach to making sure that the cellists are not going to kind of get to a point where they are just tied in knots?
I think, all these approaches are fabulous. I don't think there's any one that you can say, oh, do that. I think when it comes to the body, the first thing I like to introduce my students is to their pelvis. So, ask them to just put their hands right under their butt, and then, oh, I have sits bones, I can feel those bones. and then learn about just the different ways the pelvis can rock. It's actually 3 different ways. We can use this one, forward and back. We can shift from side to side, and we can twist. Actually, no, yeah, there's 3 ways. Cellists, so you're kind of, that's more of the spine. So then, yeah, and then they also, I try to make them aware of their spinal column. And yeah, I mean, you kind of have to keep doing it all through their training, because whenever a student comes in for a lesson, you don't know how they're going to be that day. They might be a lot more tense than usual or whatever. I mean, sometimes I ask a student, why don't you just lie on the floor for a minute? I want you to just feel, and because that actually calms the nervous system, just that stillness and the contact with the floor. That's part of the Feldenkrais, just lying on the floor and just noticing the contact.
Yeah, that awareness, just becoming aware is so,
and actually,
that's part of the battle.
Right. Yeah, and then even if you're about to play something, you just visualize how you're about to move. That's a Feldenkrais thing. Before you even do it, because your brain is actually activating those pathways if you're just thinking about what you're about to do.
Yeah. Isn't that fascinating?
It's fascinating. I love it.
Outstanding. All right. Well, what are some of the upcoming projects for 2022, 2023?
Well, I mean, all I have in my head right now is getting my students to play as best as they can, because I really want them to bring their playing up to as high a level in this. It's going to be a sextet of cellists. It's been on and off because people have had COVID or been away on vacation, but we have a few more rehearsals coming up.
All right.
And so, yeah, and getting them to lead, because often I will play with them and I'm leading the group. So that's my short-term goal, is to get each one to be a leader for different repertoire. And this coming year, I mean, I'm not planning yet anything for the fall, although I was thinking maybe a November solo recital might be a nice thing. I haven't done that for a few years now.
Yeah.
Partly due to COVID and other reasons. And I'm also wondering if I should have a more formal recital. I've been shying away from that. But I had a very informal one last April, and it was so informal that I wasn't clear with the parents whether they were even invited. So a few turned up, which was okay, but it's I had a lot of people also who hadn't even performed because of COVID for a few years. So I don't know. I also want to do a little composing. I wrote my first string quartet a couple of years ago, and I love it, but I want to expand it. So, but that takes like, I have to say, okay, I have to devote a lot of time for me to do composing, and that's hard. So I don't know if I really do want to get to that. I'm going to make that a goal. Right now, I've made it a goal. I've said it live. And yeah, I'll probably in the wintertime with my younger students, which I did last year, I have like a 10-week series, well, one class a week of just a group class, which I do a little bit of cello ensemble, but they were just beginners last winter. Now they're about beginning of Suzuki Book 2 right now. I'll do that for them, and then I don't know. That's all I've got in my head right now.
Nice. Suzanne, I wonder, do you have a favorite composition of yours and arrangement, just for the viewers that are going to go and check these out?
Yeah, well, I guess my favorite, which actually I really want to get a good recording of, is it's a Bach 2-part invention. In the original key was F minor, but I transposed it to E minor, and the C string has a scordatura, a tuning to a half step lower to low B. So it's just really cool to hear a low B on the cello, and the sound that produces it. And what I do with a 2-part invention is I add a couple of other lines, which I think Bach would be okay with, because he makes it so obvious what actually happens. And also, I think that particular keyboard work of his sounds so much better on strings, because it doesn't sound all that exciting when you play it on the piano. It's the number 9 in F minor.
Well, the way they borrow their own material so often, I'm sure I mean, that was standard operating procedure, I think.
Right. But I haven't done that piece with my students simply because of, the tuning. But I've tried it with colleagues once, and I made an audio recording of myself, which is not that great, which is actually on the website, I think. But so that's probably my favorite arrangement. Composition that I've ever written. Oh boy, I don't know. I don't know. I think it's going to be my string quartet, which I have as a short version, but like I said, I'll going to work on that to expand it.
All right. Well, we all look forward to hearing it, and good luck setting aside. I know how that can be, making the time where you just have no other distractions and you're just going to get to do that project.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Suzanne. This has been very, very fun and informative. And everybody's going to check out and bookmark your website with the wonderful resources you put there. And thank you for doing that. There's no such thing as having too many resources to go to for whatever aspect of learning the instrument or repertoire or playing better or whatever's on the given student's mind at the time. Thank you.
I'll just mention that on the website, the menu is a lot more extensive than it looks, because if you click on one link in the menu, at the top of each page you'll see other areas which everything is interrelated. So it's kind of cool. You couldn't do that in a book, and I just think it's so fascinating to do that on the website.
Yeah, and again, it sounds like it's one of those things that is going to also continue to evolve over time.
Absolutely.
Like continuing education approach will do.
Yeah, I don't often update it, but when I do, I think, oh wow, I really have to change that.
But don't do that when you're composing. Set aside.
No.
All right. Well, thanks again, and happy practicing to everybody over the weekend, and we'll see you this time next Friday. Take care.